Well, when someone starts making AngularJS directives, they're mostly interested in knowing about the link function. And one more, the compile function. And this is gonna be a favorite question as well if you're facing an interview on AngularJS. I mean, most people ask what's the difference between them. So we're gonna first understand what is a link function. We use link function for doing DOM manipulation inside our directive and for adding event listeners. So this time I'm gonna create a different type of directive called the decorative directive. The directive we have created in previous lecture was a domain-specific component directive, which we mostly restrict as an element. When we create decorative directive, we restrict them as an attribute, which is kind of decorator attribute, adding new behaviors to the existing element. So I'm going to create a new decorator directive, say allow numbers only, which I'm going to apply to text input elements, and it's going to allow only numbers to be entered into the text input. Let's restrict it to attribute only, and it's going to be our decorator. I mean, it's a decorator which is going to decorate my text input element with new functionality, right? And we can create such a decorator directives and assign them as an attribute to our elements. So let's create a new text input element and decorate it with allow numbers only directive. And I'm going to pass one string which I will use as a message later. Okay, so let's add a link function to our directive. Now this function takes 5 arguments, but we are mostly interested in 3. And they are, the first one is the scope object. This can be either parent scope or an isolated scope if we have used scope attribute and assigned an object to it. Second argument is an element. This is a JQLite element. I mean, kind of jQuery element if you have embedded jQuery before AngularJS script file, because AngularJS has cut down version of jQuery called JQLite. So you don't even need to add jQuery if you're using AngularJS. But if you have embedded jQuery.js here before Angular.js file, Angular is going to use the full version of jQuery. Okay, so this element either can be a JQLite element or a jQuery element. Third argument is attributes object, which contains name value pair of all the attributes defined on this element. So let's log these arguments one by one. So first I'm going to define one property on my scope object, say title, and give it some value. Let's log the scope first. Run the app, open the console, and you can see it's my parent scope object having title. Let's log element. Refresh, and it's JQLite element having these useful functions which looks similar to jQuery functions, right? And finally, let's log attributes. Refresh again, and there we go. You can see the attribute added on my input element. Cool. So as I said, we use link function to do DOM manipulation, right? So to do DOM manipulation, what we need? Yep, that's right, an element. That's why AngularJS is passing this element here inside this link function as an argument. So first I'm going to create a variable, say message, and I'm going to assign it a value from attributes object. Allow numbers only attributes value. Next, I'm going to create a new span element using angular.element function. Then I'm going to insert my message inside this span element. So our message element is ready. I'm going to append the message span element after my element. Refresh, and there we go. Our text input has got some hint now, which is saying you can only enter numbers here inside this text input. So we know how to do DOM manipulation here inside this link function. I mean, this is just a simple example, but just imagine what else you can do here inside this link function. you can even create the whole template based on some conditions, right? Next, as I said, we can listen for events here inside our link function. So as I have the element, I can add event listeners to it. So I'm going to add a key down event on my text input element, then a handler function. Inside this handler function, I'm going to paste some code which will allow only numbers to be entered in the text input. Refresh. So if I type any character here inside this text input, it doesn't accept it and also logs that I have entered a character. And if I enter a number, it's accepting and logging as well. So you know now how and when to use link function, DOM manipulations, as well as event binding.